Hi everyone, Wismeril here. Today I want to talk about the Abattoirs of Zir and more importantly the breakpoints that you'll be needing to reach in order to progress smoothly in those 20 tiers of what is going to be a remake of the Greater Rift from Diablo 3. I'm very familiar with the Greater Rift system in Diablo 3 because I've been playing quite a lot of Diablo 3. Diablo 4 is not exactly Diablo 3, but I'm pretty sure they implemented the same philosophy when it comes to those Abattoirs of Zir compared to what was done in Diablo 3. So in Diablo 3, with the Greater Rift system, there was a multiplier. There were two multipliers when you were moving from one tier to the next one. There was a multiplier from the health pool of the monsters, and there was a multiplier for the damage that monsters were doing to you. From one tier to the other, let's say moving from tier 100 to 101 in Greater Rifts in Diablo 3, monsters' hit points pool was multiplied by 1.17, and the damage that monsters were doing to you was multiplied by 1.02. This was applying to every monster, trash mobs, elites, and bosses, and it was multiplied all the way to GR 150. Now, we don't have those numbers yet, because obviously the patch is not live yet, but I'm pretty sure they are going to implement the same philosophy when it comes to the Abattoirs of Zir, and it's just a matter of reverse engineering the numbers when it's out on December 5 to find those numbers and to have a good idea of what is needed, like how much you need to multiply your damage, how much you need to multiply your toughness in order to move from one tier to the next one without feeling any difference, if you will. So those numbers are going to be reverse engineered when the game mode is live. We don't have that. But I can already give you a few important breakpoints that you will need to reach, and you can prepare your character with those breakpoints prior to December 5, so that when the patch is live, you're settled, you're ready to go, you're going to have a smooth experience from at least tier 1 to, I would say, tier 10, where you're going to be immortal or nearly immortal, where you'll be able to take multiple hits without dying, and you'll be able to recover all the health you've been losing from those hits. And for the damage, you just have to pick the S plus tier build for every class and you will be fine. But I want to focus on this video on the defense breakpoints that are very important to achieve prior to this new game mode being live. We're going to see a few of those. Damage reduction, recovery, health pool, resistance. That's what I have in store for you today in this video. So let's start with the armor breakpoints. When it comes to armor breakpoints, there are a few values that are very important to reach. So as you can see over here, the maximum armor you can get, like the maximum damage reduction from the armor you could get, is capped at 85%. So what armor does is when physical damage is incoming, like can be a hit from a monster or some bleeding damage, physical bleeding damage, physical dot, then your armor is going to be taken into account. The level of the monster is going to be taken into account, and the damage is going to be reduced. Given those two factors, the physical damage is gonna get reduced. So let's talk breakpoints, okay? I'm gonna use as an example the ball lightning build that most likely everyone's gonna start with, every sorcerer is gonna start with when it comes to the Abattoirs of Zir. So there's a few values that I want to introduce first. the first value is going to be the sum of the armor of all the pieces you're wearing. Let's imagine that you have 925 pieces everywhere and you upgraded those 5 times. Then your value, i.e. the sum of all those armor values, is going to be 5010. Let's see how it's gonna work out. By the way, I'm going to use the spreadsheet from Xario. He did an excellent job at reverse engineering the damage reduction you get from armor depending on the monster level. So I'm going to link in the description of this video the video he did about this spreadsheet. Shout out to him, he did an amazing job. Just drop by his video, drop a like, a comment, and subscribe because his stuff is pretty good. So back to the value. Let's use this 5010. So if we just have those 5010 armor and the monsters are level 154, like it's the case on the Nightmare Dungeon tier 100, then the damage reduction coming from armor applying to physical damage is only going to be 11.72%. That's nearly nothing. That's not enough to survive, right? So now let's factor in something else. Let's say we use the Disobedience legendary power, giving us a multiplier of 1.66 to the sum of our armor coming from all the different armor slots. 5010 times 1.66 equals 8316.6. Let's just put 8317. So you can see that by just doing that, we have raised our damage reduction on physical damage up to 41.31%. That's a big jump from those 10-ish percent that we had initially. That's why, spoiler alert, Disobedience is in every build because it's so good at reducing your physical damage. But we are very far from the cap. The value is capped at 85%. You cannot reduce physical damage beyond 85%. And if monsters were level 154, like it's the case in Nightmare Dungeon tier 100, the max armor needed to reach the 85% cap would be 13,201.35 plus armor, and we are still very far from that. So that's why you see that in most of my builds, including my Ball Lightning build for hardcore and Nightmare Dungeon push, and also of course for the Abattoirs of Zir, is including a lot more armor. First, we want to rock the Snow Veiled Legendary on another defensive slot, which is the Helm in that case. It's giving us plus 30% increased armor after popping Ice Armor and for 5 seconds. We also want percentage total armor rolls wherever we can get them. We can only get them on Helm, Chest, and Pants. On Pants, it's not optimal because we want to scale the damage, the multiplier of Ball Lightning, as well as getting damage reduction. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we're gonna get this total armor percentage rolls on the chest and on the helm. And it's all summed up before multiplying the armor from our internal level of gear over there. So 66 plus 30 plus 29.3 plus 29.3, and then let's imagine that we have another armor roll over here for another 29.3. That would be 5010 times 2.839, because the sum of all of that is 1.839. So that would do 14,223.39. So let's see how much damage reduction we get on physical damage. If we get that, we exceed the cap because we only need 13,201 to get 85% damage reduction. So by having a full set like this, having armor everywhere we can get it, and having the max rolls on everything, we are exceeding the max value. Now, we won't have this roll over here. So we're not getting the maximum value. Besides that, you're not going to have perfect rolls on every piece of your gear. So you will be very close if you use this build that I shared in the video description. Having those critical rolls on armor, you will be nearly capped on the physical damage reduction from your armor. And this is very important. Now, we don't know what level the monsters are going to be in the Abattoir of Zir. I'm going to update this calculation, and I will share this in a separate video after December 5, or whenever we can get the information on the monster level inside the Abattoir of Zir. But I can tell you, it is safe to assume that the difficulty of the content is going to be very high. And if ever they are not 154, and they are only, I don't know, the equivalent of a Nightmare Dungeon tier 80, if they're only 135, then I will be sure to update the maximum armor needed to reach the 85% damage reduction cap on physical damage. You'll find that in a separate video on the channel after December 5. But for now, I really recommend that on December 5, if we don't know anything about the Abattoir of Zir, you venture in the dungeon with all those rolls. Best in slots on those pieces there to maximize as much as you can the physical damage reduction from armor. So that's it for the armor. Now let's have a look at how we're going to cap out our resistance. Right, let's talk about resistances. First, let me introduce how they work. If you have negative resistance, it's going to increase the damage you are taking. If your resistance to fire is 0, you will take 100% of the fire damage. If your fire resistance is minus 50, you're going to take 150%, that is a 1.5 multiplier, on the fire damage that is incoming. So it is very important to maximize your resistance. It caps at 70% naturally, and on the Sorcerer class, thanks to a few tricks, namely the Enchanter glyph that is best in slot in the starter board, we're going to increase the resistance to lightning and to fire up to 75%. And if ever we use this potent warding node in the skill tree, we're going to get an additional 3%, but I'm not using that in that build. And if you're using an elixir, you can even increase it beyond, but I'm never taking those values into account. What I'm interested to discuss today is the best in slot affixes, where to get them in order to reach the most interesting breakpoint when it comes to resistance, which is 70% and 75% for some of them. And those best in slot rolls are not going to be on your chest armor, on your pants, and on your helm, because it is more important to get damage reduction on the chest and pants and to get armor rolls on the helm, chest, and pants. And when it comes to the helm, there's a lot more utility rolls that we do need to get, and we don't want to get the resistance rolls over there. In my opinion, the only best in slot rolls for resistance would be your boots. And you have 2 of them, because you do want to get movement speed and mana cost reduction in the vast majority of your builds. So there you can get 2 rolls. And then the next best in slot rolls for your resistances are going to be your jewelry slots. That's where you will get a gem that's going to further increase it. The prefix on amulets, rings, and unique rings will also contribute to maximizing your all resistance as well as your Paragon board. Let's start from there. We are using the ball lightning, the most optimized version I was able to put for the ball lightning, having all multipliers. I don't recommend getting any, I recommend getting offense on your Paragon boards. It's fine to get like maximum health and all resistance here and there where you can grab it, but I don't recommend doing this, which I did at some point while I was theory crafting. How much damage reduction, resistance, max health can you get from the Paragon board? And I theory crafted the most toughness I can put from the Paragon board. It would look like this, but you're losing so much when it comes to offense. You're losing so many damage multipliers. You're losing all the additive part of your bucket, that mostly comes from the Paragon. So it is best in slot to put the damage on the Paragon boards and to grab here and there those damage reduction or maximum health or all resistance nodes, but it's definitely not worth it to over invest in the Paragon board to reach this. Like, yes, you can mitigate damage from chilled enemies, vulnerable enemies, burning enemies. You can get some armor damage reduction from elites. You can scale your maximum HP pool, but if you do that, you're going to cut so much damage. I don't think you'll be able to progress in the Abattoirs of Zir. I think at some point you need to scale your damage in the most optimal way, scale your defenses in the most optimal way. Therefore, this is the Paragon board that I recommend. That's the one I'm using for hardcore. I really think it's the optimal version, where the remaining points that you're not using in offense, you will use it to scale your max health pool a little bit. You're getting a few damage reduction here and there because they are best in slot for the remaining points. But mostly it comes down to multiplying your damage as much as you can. Now, having this said, this specific Paragon board have 25% fire resistance over here and 10% lightning resistance that you get because you need to get your glyphs to the maximum. So having that in mind, we are going to want rolls that matters on your prefix of the ring. You see, fire resistance is already at 25% from your Paragon board, and by only adding one prefix roll at around 12, you're going to max out at 85% your fire resistance. This is taking into account the minus 50% on all resistance coming from World Tier 4. And your max fire resistance is 75%. And there is a mistake because I cannot use the new ring that's going to be best in slot in that build and in many other Sorcerer builds, the Tal Rasha unique ring, that's going to multiply your damage by 60%. That is no joke. And this ring has as a prefix resistance to all elements. It's just the difference between those two. The first prefix and the second is a multiplier of 2.5 from the second prefix to the first prefix. It is the same as if we would remove 4.8 from the final value at 950, which means that the real value for this resistance, and if we would put the new ring over here, that would be 85.2 minus 4.8 minus 5, because it caps at 5%. And that's another 5% that is exceeding the maximum. So by having just one prefix roll on fire resistance and this Paragon board, you're capping out your fire resistance at 75. Let's talk about lightning resistance. We have 10% from the Paragon board over here. And by just adding one gem into our jewelry, we're going to cap out at more than 75% the lightning resistance. So this is done by just one gem over here. Now for the three remaining, this is where you want to have rolls on your boots. And as you can see here, I took the minimum value for an ancestral item on the boots. Another way to say it is maximize your mana cost reduction and movement speed on boots, and then look for any pair of boots that's going to have the prefix you want, like reducing evade cooldown, and then having either shadow, poison or cold, having one of those and the other one you could roll, for instance, this is how you're going to get the most value out of your gear. Let's say you have a pair of boots with the minimum roll of poison and shadow. Well, guess what? The minimum roll in this highly optimized build with skill tree, paragon, and everything taken into account, having the minimum roll over there is going to maximize at more than 70%, taking into account everything, your poison and shadow. And it could be the same for cold. So for cold, or for the last resistance that's not going to be present on your boots, you want to have one gem in your gear. See, cold resistance, I don't have it anywhere except that gem for 30%, and that 30% is going to maximize your cold resistance at 70%. And if you do that, you're free to use the remaining gem on your amulet, on your jewelry, with armor or with anything else you like, but the best in slot is armor when you're capped out on everything else. This, my friends, is the best setup you can have. Only look for resistance on your boots and adjust with your gems. If for whatever reason you're not capping out there, remove the armor here and insert the missing one that's going to cap out your resistance. It's very easy to do it if you know where to look for things. Armor over here, damage reduction that we're going to talk in a second over there and here, and resistance in here. Next, let's talk about damage reduction. On to damage reduction, the mother of all damage mitigation in Diablo 4. This is because armor only applies to physical damage, resistance only applies to elemental damage, and damage reduction applies to everything. That's why it is so important to get damage reduction and to reach certain breakpoints that are really going to help you progress through the Abattoirs of Zir and push to the highest level the nightmare dungeons without risking to die in hardcore, for instance. Now, two things to say. The Paragon board is not the place to maximize your damage reduction. It is not optimized to do it here. You don't want to do it there. You want to grab a few nodes here and there because they are in the area and you have a few points to spare, but you don't want to over-invest here when it comes to damage reduction. Let's talk skill tree. The lightning specs on Sorcerer have inherently very good nodes when it comes to damage reduction. The best Sorcerer build at the moment in Season 2 is Bolt Lightning. It's a lightning spec, therefore we will have more than what we usually get when it comes to reducing damage because of the lightning damage that we apply to enemies. And the most important way to have damage reduction on your character is on your gear. You have up to 4 defensive legendary items. Those are helm, chest, pants, and amulets. More often than not, people are just putting offensive legendary powers on the amulets, and they are going to die a lot when it comes to Nightmare Dungeon 100, and I'm expecting this to also be the case when it will come to the Abattoirs of Zir. So here you definitely want to have damage reduction on your amulet. The amulet can host anything. It can be offense, defense, and utility. I like to have 3 amulets per build I'm playing. I usually have one offensive amulet like this one that I'm using for, I think, killing Lilith or single target damage. I'm using that one for the Bolt Lightning. I have a utility one that I like to use for speed farming, Blood Harvest, Hell Tides, Nightmare Dungeons, tier 60, 70, 80 in the case of that build because it's very strong. So an utility one and another one for pushing like this one. So you could do, this is a slot that you would adjust depending on the activity you're doing. Now, when it comes to Nightmare Dungeon Push, Hardcore, and Abattoirs of Zir, it is really important to get your 4th defensive power over there. You see, we're getting those 2 armor powers, and if we are not running any here, we would only have the Ever Living on the pants, and that's not enough. So let's have a look at the one I recommend for that build, but for other builds I will include links. The Mage Lord Legendary Power. When you're running the VR Mastery from the skill tree, which we are when it comes to hardcore or pushing, you're going to have a 40% damage reduction when there are 3 enemies in melee range. 40 is a very high number. This is why it's better to get those over here than in the Paragon board. All those damage reduction rolls are multiplicative to each other, but it's invert multiplicative, if it makes sense. Like the more you get, the less you stack. So you want to have a few of them with large numbers rather than a lot of them with little numbers. It makes a big difference. It makes a difference, let's put it this way. So over here, by running this amulet, you reduce your damage by 40% as long as there are 3 enemies in melee range. If those enemies are crowd control, if those enemies are vulnerable in this build, then that's another 25% that you damage reduction that you get. From the skill tree, like I mentioned, the lightning spec have access to nice things. If you crit, melee enemies are going to deal 25%, around 25% less damage to you. If you're a big spender of mana, like we are in this build, then you get 21% damage reduction. And if you crit them, they are going to deal 15% less damage to you. We are looking for the highest number. This is why we're also getting the Holy Trinity on amulets, chest armor, and pants when it comes to damage reduction. Damage reduction from distant, close, and burning, because those are the highest number you can get. And it is not best in slot to get the regular damage reduction because it only goes up to 10 compared to having a total armor roll on your gear. So this is what you're looking for when it comes to defense. You can only get that on the chest armor because on the pants it is best in slot to scale the multiplier of your ball lightning with ranks. That's why we are not getting armor over here, neither there, because it's best to have mana cost reduction on your amulet. That's the highest roll you could get from amulet, boots, and offhand. So that's what you're looking for. The Holy Trinity of damage reduction from distance, close, and burning everywhere you can get it. And if you reach, like I didn't do the math of the inverted multiplication. If you beg me in the comments to do it, I will do it, but I don't have it right here. But from the experience I have playing Nightmare Dungeons tier 100, this is the sweet spot you want to be in. I can give you the number later on if I just do the math. So having 4 defensive legendaries and the Holy Trinity of damage reduction on your gear is going to do a lot, alongside you playing lightning and getting a little bit here and there on the Paragon board. Those are the breakpoints you want to have for hardcore Nightmare Dungeon push tier 100, and if you use that for the Abattoirs of Zir, it is very safe to say that you're going to have an easy time from tier 1 to tier 10, maybe. I don't have the numbers exactly here. And then maybe it will start to be extremely challenging from 10 to 21, where you're gonna die in 6 shots, and then 5 shots, and then 4, 3, and maybe at tier 21, you're going to be 2 shots from anything, like you can take 1-2 hits and you're dead. Well, guess what? If you're getting 1 shot from anything, you're not going to progress in the Abattoirs of Zir. So it is very safe to assemble all those breakpoints on your gear, on the ball lightning build, for instance, before December 5, so that the first day you venture into the Abattoirs of Zir, which doesn't spell this way, by the way, you're going to be very safe. Okay, now let's talk recovery. Recovery is the last topic that I want to cover in this video. Once you have all that toughness, before I talk recovery, we do get the maximum life wherever we can, where it's accessible, to scale our recovery as much as possible, right? So, but over-investing in the maximum life is only good when you already have some breakpoints that you reach. Now let's talk recovery. Recovery is a multiplier for your toughness. when, let's imagine that tier 21, 2 shots kill you, right? But if enemy shoot you one time and then you recover all your health, by the time the second hits come, you have virtually doubled your toughness, right? So recovery is extremely important when it comes to pushing the highest tier of content. It was the case in Greater Rifts in Diablo 3. I'm pretty sure it's going to be the case in the Abattoirs of Zir in Diablo 4. Now, how do we do recovery? Well, on the Sorcerer, it's done with barriers, mostly through Ice Armor, which has a set value of 30%, and then 5% of the damage you do, or 10% of the damage you do to vulnerable enemy, is going to be a barrier that you recover. So you take a hit, and I don't know, that's 20%, that's 90% of this shield gone. Guess what? You've just recovered all of it before the second hit comes. This is recovery. The other way we sorcerers do it is with the protection node over there, which is doing exactly the same with cooldowns. Press a cooldown, you have 30% of your max life as a barrier. You take a hit, 90% of that shield is gone. Press another cooldown, bang, that's 30% of your life back as a barrier, and this is recovery. So that's how we used to do things before Season 2, and that's very efficient, a very efficient way to do recovery. If you're not getting one shot, let me insist on that. Comes Season 2, a very important vampiric power was introduced, the Undying one. Before that, the Sorcerer didn't have access to recovery in a meaningful way. We only had warmth that was scaling with density, and it was very clunky to use for pushing, to say the least. Now we have access to that, which is very good. Every time you press a button, every time you cast a spell, every time you do anything that involves casting a skill, you're going to recover 3% of your max life. It scales very well with your max life, which we are taken into account with a few nodes here and there, some rubies and stuff. Our max life is 12,267 in that build. It's what you will get from being level 100 because it doesn't rely on any rolls anywhere. And then 3% of that max value is going to be recovered when you cast spells. Like I said, we're going to do most of our recovery with barriers. But now we have access to getting back to full life if a hit takes all the barrier and a little bit of our health pool, and then we put some barriers on top of that. It could save us because we don't have, maybe we won't have the reflex to pop the potion, but we're going to be still fighting and we're going to recover that. So recovery, extremely important when it comes to reaching those breakpoints. There's no breakpoint here, but you need to get this glyph, this vampiric power going, and you need to get 3 points in protection and 3 points in ice armor plus extensions to get not breakpoints, but to get the most recovery you can get. And this, my friend, by running this build is how I highly suggest you venture into your first Abattoirs of Zir when it's going to come out on December 5. I'm going to share the link, having all my builds plus this one. Just a note, this Ring of Starless Sky is not the Ring of Starless Skies. It's the Tal Rasha Iridescent Loop, but Max Roll is not updated yet with it. It's going to be best in slot for the vast majority of the Sorcerer builds from now on, because we can rock 4 elements: fire, ice, lightning, and poison from this best in slot vampiric power. I'm going to cover that in a separate video, the breakpoints you want to reach for the Abattoirs of Zir on many builds, starting with the Bolt Lightning. Anyway, this was Wismeril. I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you're going to have a blast playing the Abattoirs of Zir. Let me know in the comments if there's something I missed out and I didn't cover, or if there's something you didn't understand. It was a lengthy video. I like to explain things a lot so that every player can get all the information to go further in Diablo 4. If that's too much for you, or if the video is too long, use the chapters in the, browse from armor to damage reduction, and if ever there's something you already know, move on to the next chapter. That's what I recommend to do in order to keep those videos for everyone, from the total beginners to the casuals to the pro players, experienced players, veterans, call them however you like. I'm trying to address every type of audience. Anyway, it was a pleasure to have you there, and I'll see you guys in the next videos. Take care.